My wife raised her glass, smiled at her parents, and told everyone I married her for money. The room laughed. I didn't, because my phone was already ringing, and the caller ID changed everything. It was supposed to be a celebration. Emily's parents had just finished renovating their lakefront home outside Westport, Connecticut. The kind of place with glass walls, imported stone flooring, and a dock long enough to hold 3 boats. They invited 40 or 50 people, most of them from their social circle, attorneys, real estate developers, a couple of hedge fund managers, and the usual friends who wore success like a uniform. I never really fit in with that crowd, not because I didn't understand them, but because I never felt the need to perform. I was standing near the bar when Emily clinked her glass. The low hum of conversation faded. Her father, Richard, smiled proudly beside her. Her mother adjusted her bracelet, the diamond one she wore to make sure people noticed. Emily looked beautiful. She always did when she was hosting. Confident, polished, comfortable in a room like this. Then she looked at me. "And of course," she said, her voice light, almost playful, "we couldn't have finished this place without family support, and I guess Daniel deserves some credit too." A few polite smiles. She tilted her head slightly. After all, marrying into money was probably his best investment. The laughter came fast. Too fast. A few people chuckled politely. Others laughed harder, the way people do when they think they're allowed to. Someone near the bar muttered, "Smart guy," under their breath. I felt the shift in the room, subtle but real. The quiet agreement, the assumption. I glanced at Emily. She was smiling, not nervous, not apologetic, just comfortable, like this was a harmless joke. Richard laughed the loudest. "Hey, nothing wrong with that," he added, raising his drink. Emily leaned into him slightly, still smiling, and for a moment I realized something that felt heavier than the laughter. This wasn't spontaneous. This had been building. The comments, the little jokes, the way she'd started introducing me differently over the last few months. I kept my expression neutral. I've always believed that reacting too quickly gives people more than they deserve. Then my phone vibrated in my hand. I almost ignored it, but the name on the screen made me pause. Michael Hargrove. He never called me directly, not unless something required immediate attention. I stepped slightly away from the bar and answered quietly. "Daniel," I said. His voice came through, calm but urgent. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but the board just confirmed. We need your authorization tonight." I glanced back toward the crowd. Emily was still smiling, talking now, explaining something about Daniel's simple tastes, while a few guests nodded politely. "What happened?" I asked. "They finalized the acquisition," Michael said. "It went through faster than expected. The family group's holding company is now fully under Mercer Capital control." I didn't say anything for a second. Behind me, someone laughed again at something Emily said. Michael continued, "We're scheduling the announcement tomorrow morning, but they need your approval on the final release. The CEO's here with me." I watched Emily take another sip of champagne, completely at ease. "Give me 10 minutes, I said. "Of course, Mr. Mercer." He hung up. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. Then I walked back toward the group. Emily noticed me first. She smiled again, that same polished, effortless smile. "Daniel," she said lightly, "we were just talking about you." A few people looked at me with that polite curiosity, the kind reserved for someone who doesn't quite belong. I nodded slightly. "Actually," I said, calm and even, "I just got an important call." Richard chuckled. "Hope it wasn't work. Tonight's about family." I met his eyes briefly. "It was," I said, "and it does involve family." I saw Emily's expression shift, just slightly. A flicker of confusion. She hadn't expected that. Neither had anyone else. And for the first time that night, the room got just a little quieter. Because 10 minutes from now, the joke she had just told everyone was about to become something else entirely. I met Emily 4 years earlier, in a place that probably should have told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't at a party, or a country club, or through mutual friends. It was at a quiet coffee shop in Stamford, the kind of place where people worked on laptops and didn't make eye contact. I'd taken a corner table near the window, reviewing a set of documents before a call. She sat across from me, asked if she could share the outlet, and thanked me with a polite smile that felt genuine. She wasn't dressed like someone trying to impress anyone. Dark jeans, a light sweater, minimal makeup. She seemed normal. That's what caught my attention. We ended up talking when her laptop froze, and she made a frustrated sound under her breath. I offered to take a look, more out of habit than anything, and we ended up talking for nearly an hour. About work, about growing up, about the strange way people in that part of Connecticut seemed to measure each other. She told me her family was in real estate. I told her I worked in investments. Neither of us asked for details. That, more than anything, made it easy. Our first few months together were simple. Quiet dinners, walks along the harbor, weekend drives without a destination. She never asked what I made, never asked about assets, never asked about numbers, and I never volunteered them. I'd learned a long time ago that money changed how people listen to you. I preferred to remove that variable entirely. Emily seemed to appreciate that. She once told me, about 6 months in, that she liked how calm things felt with me, that I didn't try to impress her, that I didn't need to. Looking back now, I think that was the version of us I held onto for too long. I met her parents about 8 months into the relationship. They invited me to dinner at their main house, the same lakefront property we were standing in now, though it looked different then, less polished, less expanded. Richard Mercer built his wealth in commercial real estate, retail developments, office parks, mixed-use projects across the Northeast. He wasn't flashy in the loud sense, but everything about him carried quiet authority. Her mother, Diane, was different, more social, more observant, the kind of person who noticed watches, shoes, posture, tone. The dinner was polite, but I felt evaluated. Richard asked about my work. I kept it general. Private investment management, long-term positions, some advisory roles. That was enough to sound respectable without inviting deeper questions. Diane asked where I lived. A townhouse in Norwalk. I told her. She nodded, but I saw the quick calculation behind her eyes. Respectable, but not impressive. Emily squeezed my hand under the table, as if she sensed the tension. Later that night, she apologized for her mother's tone. I told her it was fine. It usually was. Over the next year, we settled into something steady. Emily moved into my townhouse. She adjusted easily to the quieter lifestyle. She even said she liked the simplicity. We cooked at home more often than we went out. Sunday mornings became routine. Coffee, the paper, the small patio behind the house. For a while, it felt solid. But the shift started slowly. It began after one of her parents' holiday parties. On the drive home, Emily was quiet longer than usual. When I asked what was wrong, she hesitated before answering. "Do you ever think about upgrading?" she asked. "Upgrading what?" "Everything. The house, the car, just moving forward." I glanced at her. "We're doing fine," I said. "I know," she replied quickly. "I just mean, we could." It wasn't an argument, just a suggestion, but it didn't disappear. A few weeks later, she mentioned a larger home one of her friends had bought. A month after that, she pointed out a new luxury SUV. Small things, casual comments, nothing confrontational. Still, I noticed. Emily also started spending more time with her parents again. Lunches with her mother, weekend visits, events she asked me to attend less frequently. And when we did attend together, I began hearing subtle changes in how she introduced me. "This is Daniel. He works in investments." Then later, "This is Daniel. He keeps things pretty low-key." Then later still, "Daniel prefers a simple lifestyle." Each version sounded harmless, but each one shifted the frame slightly. One evening, about 18 months before the party, I came home and found Emily sitting at the kitchen counter, reviewing something on her laptop. "What's that?" I asked. She turned the screen slightly. "Real estate listings. Houses." I said. She smiled. "Just browsing." The listings weren't casual. They were lakefront properties. 5-bedroom homes. 7-figure listings. I leaned against the counter. "Emily." "I know," she said quickly. "I just like looking." I didn't push, but something about that moment stayed with me. Because she wasn't just looking at houses. She was looking at a different version of her life, and I wasn't sure anymore whether I fit into it. A few months later, her parents announced a major renovation on their lake house. A full redesign. New dock. New interior. Expanded guest wing. Emily became deeply involved. Weekend meetings with designers. Discussions about finishes. Furniture selections. She talked about it constantly. And that's when the comments about money started becoming sharper. Not aggressive. Just pointed. One night, while we were getting ready for bed, she said, "You know, my dad thinks this renovation will add at least $3 million in value." "That sounds about right," I said. She hesitated. "You've never told me what your portfolio looks like." I looked at her. "I've told you I keep things private." "I know, but we're married now." Her tone wasn't angry, just curious. Still, I didn't answer. And that was the first time I saw real frustration in her expression. She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. But something shifted between us that night. Not loudly, just quietly. And over the next few months, I started noticing something else. Emily began telling small stories about me to her family. Stories that framed me differently. About how I preferred modest living. About how I didn't care about money. About how she handled most of the big decisions. Each one subtle. Each one harmless on its own. But together, they created a version of me that felt smaller. I didn't confront her. At the time, I thought it was just social dynamics. Family influence. Harmless exaggeration. Looking back, that was probably my biggest mistake. Because by the time the party invitations went out for the finished lake house, Emily had already started telling a story about me. And I didn't realize yet that I was about to become the punchline. The first time I realized Emily might actually be embarrassed by me. It wasn't during an argument. It was during a dinner with her friends. They had chosen a new restaurant in Greenwich. The kind of place where the lighting was soft. The tables were spaced too far apart. And no one looked at the menu before ordering. Emily had dressed more formally than usual. When I showed up in a blazer and dark jeans, she gave me a quick glance that lingered just a second too long. "You didn't want to wear the navy suit?" she asked quietly as we waited for the hostess. "This is fine, isn't it?" I said. She smiled. "Of course." But she adjusted her posture slightly, like she was already preparing to explain me. Dinner was polite, but I noticed the pattern quickly. Her friends talked about new homes, investment properties, renovations, and travel plans. One couple had just purchased a second home in Aspen. Another was discussing a private school waiting list. Emily participated easily. I listened. When someone eventually asked what I did, Emily answered before I could. "Daniel manages investments. He prefers long-term stuff. Very conservative." Conservative. I'd never used that word about my work. I nodded anyway. Later, when the check came, one of the husbands grabbed it automatically. Emily laughed and said, "Daniel's perfectly fine with that. He's very low maintenance." It sounded like a joke, but the table accepted it quickly. I didn't react. I'd learned long ago that money conversations were rarely about money. They were about positioning. On the drive home, Emily seemed relaxed, even cheerful. "You were quiet tonight," she said. "They seemed nice," I replied. "They are. They just live a certain way." I glanced at her. "And we don't." She hesitated. "I just think we could," she said softly. That word again. Could. Not need. Not want. Could. Over the next few weeks, the pressure became more direct. Emily began asking about specific things. Not just lifestyle, but numbers. How liquid are most of your investments? Do you hold mostly equities or private positions? Have you ever considered moving into development deals like my dad? They were thoughtful questions, but they came more frequently than before. One evening, she asked if I had ever considered joining her father's business more formally. "I like what I do," I told her. "He respects you," she said. "You know that, right?" "I know. He just thinks you're underutilized." That word stayed with me. Underutilized. Like I was an asset sitting idle, not a person choosing a quieter path. Around that same time, I started noticing something else. Emily began asking about documents. Not aggressively, just casually. "Where do you keep your tax records? Do you have a financial planner? Do you have a will?" Each question made sense, but taken together, they felt deliberate. Then came the prenup conversation. We'd signed a simple prenup before getting married. Nothing unusual, Both sides protected prior assets, agreed to reasonable terms, and moved forward. At the time, it had felt like a formality. About a year into our marriage, Emily brought it up again. My mom mentioned something today. She said while we were cleaning up after dinner. I kept rinsing dishes. About what? The prenup. She thinks we should revisit it. I turned slightly. Why? Just to modernize it. We're in a different place now. We're fine, I said calmly. I know, but my parents updated theirs a few years into their marriage too. That wasn't true. I knew that without asking. Still, I didn't challenge her. I'll think about it, I said. She nodded, but her expression tightened slightly. That conversation didn't disappear either. Over the next month, she mentioned it twice more. Then one afternoon, I came home early from a meeting and heard her on the phone in the living room. She didn't know I was there. I just think he doesn't really care about money, she was saying. He's comfortable letting me handle things. There was a pause. No, I don't think he'd fight it, she added. He's just easy. Easy. I stood quietly in the hallway, listening. She lowered her voice slightly. I mean, he lives in that townhouse and drives the same car he's had for years. He's not exactly ambitious. Ambitious. I stepped into the room then, and she turned quickly. Oh, you're home early. I nodded. Meeting ended sooner. She smiled, a little too quickly, and ended the call. Just talking to my mom, she said. I didn't ask what they were discussing. I already knew. That night, I sat on the patio after Emily went to bed and thought about the last year. The small comments, the reframing, the financial questions, the prenup conversation, the phone call. Each piece alone meant very little. Together, they started to form something else. Not betrayal. Not yet. But positioning. Emily was quietly shaping a narrative. A version of me that was passive, modest, dependent. I still didn't believe she meant harm. But for the first time, I started paying closer attention. A week later, the invitation arrived for the lake house party. Heavy cardstock. Embossed lettering. Formal. Emily seemed excited when it arrived. My parents are inviting everyone, she said. It's going to be big. I nodded. She looked at me carefully. You'll come, right? Of course. She smiled, relieved. But there was something else in her expression. Expectation. Or maybe anticipation. That night, she asked what I planned to wear. Then she suggested something more formal. Then she mentioned that some of her father's business partners would be there. All reasonable. Still, something about her tone felt rehearsed. 2 days before the party, I noticed another small detail. Emily was reviewing the guest list on her laptop. She didn't usually care about that level of planning. I walked behind her and glanced at the names. Several executives from companies connected to her father's developments. 2 attorneys. And one name that made me pause. Hargrove Development Group. Michael Hargrove. I didn't react outwardly, but I felt something shift. Because Emily didn't know that my firm had recently entered negotiations involving Hargrove's company, and indirectly, her father's holding group. She looked up at me. Big crowd, she said. Looks like it. I replied calmly. She smiled. It'll be a good night. I nodded, but as I walked away, I realized something quietly unsettling. Emily was planning something. I didn't know exactly what yet, but the party wasn't just a celebration. It was going to be a stage, and I had a feeling I was about to be given a role I hadn't agreed to play. 2 days before the party, I started noticing how deliberate everything around me suddenly felt. Emily wasn't just excited. She was preparing. It showed in small ways first. She asked me again what I planned to wear. Then she suggested a darker suit. Then she casually mentioned where everyone would be standing when guests arrived, how the bar would be arranged, and which conversations she expected to have. Emily had hosted before, but never like this. This felt structured, carefully structured. The night before the party, I came home and found her at the dining table with a folder open in front of her. She closed it quickly when I walked in. What's that? I asked. Just some event stuff, she said lightly. I nodded and didn't press, but as she stepped into the kitchen to answer a call, I noticed something sticking out from the folder. A document. Not event planning. Legal formatting. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, weighing whether I even wanted to know. Then I stepped forward. The top page was a revised marital agreement draft. My name, her name, updated financial terms. I read quickly. It wasn't extreme, not aggressive in an obvious way, but it was very specific. It redefined shared assets, adjusted appreciation rights, narrowed my claim to certain categories of wealth, structured separation terms. It was careful, professional, prepared. I heard her voice in the kitchen and stepped back, returning to where I'd been standing. She came back a minute later, smiling. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said calmly. She watched me for a second, like she was trying to read whether I'd seen anything. Then she closed the folder and moved it to the side. "We should leave early tomorrow," she said. "My mom wants me there before guests arrive." Of course. She seemed relieved. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was angry, because I was trying to understand. Emily hadn't shown me the document, which meant she wasn't planning to discuss it casually. She was preparing something. And then, the next morning, I got the first real confirmation. I was in my office reviewing emails when a notification came through from my legal team. It wasn't unusual. We were in the final stages of a multi-company acquisition involving several holding groups across the Northeast. But one attachment caught my attention. Ownership structure, final review. I opened it. The structure was complex, layered entities, trusts, and holding companies. But halfway through, I saw something familiar. Mercer Development Holdings. Richard Mercer's primary family entity. I leaned back slightly. Our firm, Mercer Capital, had been negotiating through intermediaries. That wasn't unusual. Discretion was standard in deals this size. But seeing the final alignment made something very clear. If the deal finalized, and we were hours away, my firm would quietly gain controlling interest in multiple development pipelines, including projects tied directly to Emily's family. I stared at the screen for a moment. The timing wasn't lost on me. The party, the revised marital agreement, the pressure, the positioning. It might have all been coincidence, but it didn't feel like coincidence. That afternoon, Emily texted me. "Don't forget, formal tonight. And please don't disappear into work mode. My parents really want you present." I responded simply, "Of course." A few minutes later, she added, "And Daniel, try to be more social tonight. People don't know you well yet." I read that message twice. People don't know you well yet. Or maybe she wanted them to know me in a specific way. I left my office earlier than usual and drove home. Emily was already dressed when I arrived. Dark navy dress, understated jewelry, perfectly composed. She looked confident, almost energized. "You ready?" she asked. "Yeah." On the drive to the lake house, she talked about guests, seating, conversations, and introductions. She sounded rehearsed, not scripted but practiced. About halfway there, she glanced at me. "You don't mind if I handle most of the hosting tonight, right?" "Of course not. Sometimes you're a little quiet." I smiled slightly. That's never been a surprise. She smiled back. "No, but tonight's important." That word again. Important. When we pulled into the long gravel drive, the house was already glowing with warm lights. Valet attendants, catering staff, parked cars lined along the drive. Emily took a breath. Then she turned to me and adjusted my jacket slightly, a gesture that felt affectionate, but also careful. "Just relax," she said softly. "I am." She nodded. Then we stepped out of the car. Inside, the house was already filling with guests. Soft music, glassware clinking, conversations layered over each other. Emily moved easily through the room, greeting people, laughing, introducing me. "This is Daniel. He keeps me grounded." "This is Daniel. He prefers a simpler life." "This is Daniel. He doesn't care much about money." Each introduction felt small, but consistent. And then, about 20 minutes in, I overheard something that finally removed any doubt. Emily was speaking with two women near the window. I wasn't meant to hear it. "I mean, Daniel's great," she said. "He's just not really driven by money." One of the women smiled. "That must be nice." Emily laughed softly. "Yeah, though sometimes I joke that he married me for my family's lifestyle." They all laughed lightly. Not harsh, but comfortable, like the idea had already been introduced before. I stood still for a moment listening, because that wasn't a joke anymore. It was a narrative, and Emily wasn't just repeating it. She was building it. That's when I realized something quietly painful. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't pressure from her parents alone. Emily was actively shaping how people saw me, positioning me, reducing me, and I still didn't confront her, because at that moment, another realization settled in. The deal, the acquisition, the timing. Emily thought she understood the financial balance in our marriage. She thought she understood the power dynamic. But by tomorrow morning, everything she believed about money, status, and control was about to change. And she didn't know it yet. I didn't confront Emily that night. Not when I overheard her. Not when she repeated the same story to someone else 15 minutes later. And not when her father casually introduced me to one of his investors as Emily's husband. He keeps things simple. Instead, I watched. There's a strange calm that settles in when something finally becomes clear. The uncertainty disappears. The questions stop. You stop wondering whether you're imagining things. You just observe. I spent the next hour moving through the room quietly, noticing patterns. Emily did most of the talking. She laughed easily. She leaned into conversations about her parents' projects. She spoke confidently about growth, expansion, new developments. And every time I was mentioned, it was in the same framing, modest, quiet, uncomplicated, not insulting, but diminishing. And the more she repeated it, the more people accepted it. At one point, Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've got a good thing here, Daniel," he said warmly. "Emily's always had strong instincts. She knows how to build." I nodded. "She does." He smiled, satisfied, like that confirmed something. Like he believed I was agreeing with a structure where Emily, and by extension, her family, held the real control. I left shortly after, claiming an early morning call. Emily didn't protest. In fact, she seemed distracted, already thinking about the larger event scheduled for the following night, the official house celebration. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I just thought, not about revenge, about clarity, because the situation wasn't emotional anymore. It was structural. Emily was building a narrative about money and control. Her parents were reinforcing it. And at the same time, my firm was finalizing an acquisition that would quietly shift real financial leverage in ways none of them seemed to anticipate. When I got home, I opened my laptop and reviewed the deal documents again. The acquisition involved 3 layered holding companies, each controlling segments of development pipelines across Connecticut and New York. The final structure placed controlling authority under Mercer Capital, my firm, with me as majority decision authority through a private trust structure. It wasn't flashy ownership. It was quiet control, the kind most people never see until decisions start changing outcomes. I scrolled further. Mercer Development Holdings, Richard's group, was heavily tied into 2 of the pipeline projects, not directly owned, but dependent on financing and approval layers that would now move through our firm. I leaned back slightly. The irony wasn't lost on me. Emily believed I had married into money, but by the time the public announcement happened, her family's biggest upcoming projects would be quietly dependent on decisions made through entities I controlled. I didn't feel satisfaction, just stillness, because this wasn't about humiliating anyone. It was about understanding how differently reality was about to look. I called my attorney the next morning. Thomas Caldwell had handled my personal legal matters for nearly a decade. He was precise, discreet, and rarely surprised. "Morning, Daniel," he answered. "Morning. I need to review something personal." "Go ahead. I think Emily is preparing to revise our marital agreement." There was a brief pause. "Has she presented anything yet?" "No, but I saw a draft. And it narrows shared asset exposure significantly." Thomas exhaled quietly. "That usually means outside influence." "I assume so. Do you want to address it?" "Not yet." Another pause. "You're planning to wait?" "Yes. Anything else I should know?" "The acquisition we discussed. It finalizes today." Thomas understood immediately. "Timing's interesting." "Very. Do you want to update your personal protection structure?" "Yes." Quietly. "Understood." Within the hour, we began reviewing adjustments. Nothing dramatic, just reinforcing separation between personal holdings, trust layers, and decision authorities. The kind of work that rarely gets noticed, which was exactly the point. By early afternoon, Michael Hargrove called again. "We're finalizing signatures," he said. "Announcement scheduled for tomorrow morning." "Good. There's one more thing," he added. "The CEO wants to meet you tonight. He's in town for the Mercer event." I paused slightly. "Tonight?" "Yes. He assumed you'd be there." I glanced at the time. "The party." "Of course." "That's fine," I said. "I'll be there." "Perfect. He'll call when he arrives." After I hung up, I sat quietly for a moment, because now the pieces were aligning more clearly. Emily was preparing a public narrative. Her family was reinforcing it. And at the same event, executives involved in the acquisition would also be present. The collision wasn't something I planned, but it was coming. That evening, Emily seemed even more focused than the night before. She moved through the house getting ready, checking her phone, confirming details with her mother. "You okay?" I asked. "Just a lot to coordinate," she said, smiling. She stepped closer and adjusted my tie again. "I want a night to go smoothly." "It will." She studied my face for a second. "You're very calm." "I usually am." She nodded, though something in her expression suggested she expected more anxiety maybe, more eagerness. But I wasn't anxious, because by that point, I understood something she didn't. Emily believed she was controlling the narrative. She believed she understood the financial structure around her. She believed the room she was about to stand in would reinforce her position. But the truth was, there were people coming to that same room who already knew my name for very different reasons. And when the call came later that night, it wouldn't just interrupt the party. It would quietly redraw the entire balance of power. By the time we arrived at the lake house the next evening, the energy felt different. The night before had been a soft gathering, early guests, close friends, family. Tonight was the real event. Valet lines stretched down the gravel drive. The catering staff had doubled. Soft lighting illuminated the lake, and a string quartet played near the glass wall overlooking the water. This wasn't just a housewarming. It was a statement. Emily stepped out of the car and immediately shifted into host mode. Her posture straightened, her smile sharpened, and she moved forward like she belonged at the center of the room. She did in many ways. This was her world. I followed quietly beside her. Inside, Richard was already greeting guests, shaking hands, laughing loudly. Diane floated between conversations, her attention moving like radar, scanning, assessing, welcoming. Within minutes, Emily was pulled into a circle near the bar. I stayed nearby, listening more than speaking. "The renovation took almost 8 months," Emily was saying. "But my dad wanted everything perfect." Someone complimented the dock. Another asked about property values. Emily answered confidently. Then someone turned to me. "And Daniel, what do you think? Quite the upgrade, right?" Emily answered before I could. "Daniel prefers things simpler," she said with a soft laugh. "He's still perfectly happy in our little townhouse." The group smiled politely. I nodded. "It works for us." Emily squeezed my arm lightly, but the gesture felt less affectionate than performative. Over the next hour, the pattern intensified. Emily introduced me repeatedly in the same way. "This is Daniel. He's not really into the money side of things." "This is Daniel. He keeps me grounded." "This is Daniel. He married into the chaos." Each time, people laughed lightly. Each time, the narrative grew stronger. At one point, Diane joined the conversation. "We always tease Emily," she said warmly. "She married someone refreshingly low maintenance." Emily smiled. "I got lucky," she replied. Diane glanced at me. "And Daniel got lucky too." The group laughed again. I stayed calm. But inside, I felt something shifting. Not anger, but clarity. Because this wasn't casual anymore. It was coordinated. Subtle, but coordinated. About 45 minutes into the evening, Emily pulled me aside near the hallway. "You're very quiet tonight," she said softly. "Just listening." She studied me. "You're not upset, are you?" "Why would I be?" She hesitated. I hope you don't mind the jokes. Everyone knows I'm kidding." I held her gaze. "Of course." She relaxed slightly. "Good. I just want a night to feel easy." She touched my arm gently and walked back toward the crowd. I watched her go, because in that moment, I realized something important. Emily wasn't trying to hurt me personally. She was trying to elevate herself. And the easiest way to do that was to make me seem smaller. A few minutes later, Richard approached me with two men in tailored suits. "Daniel, I want you to meet a couple of partners," he said. We shook hands. They introduced themselves, developers connected to one of Richard's upcoming projects. "We've heard a lot about you," one of them said politely. Emily stepped in again. "Daniel keeps things very low risk," she said. "He's not the aggressive type." I saw one of the men nod slightly, filing that away. Another subtle positioning. Then, about an hour into the party, the pressure shifted. Emily raised her glass. The room gradually quieted. Richard stepped beside her, smiling proudly. She looked around, scanning the room, and then she looked at me. I recognized the expression immediately. This wasn't spontaneous. She had planned this. And before everyone gets too comfortable, Emily began lightly. "I just want to say thank you for coming tonight. This house means a lot to my family." She spoke about her parents, about the renovation, about memories growing up near the lake. Then she smiled. "And of course, I should thank Daniel too." A few guests glanced toward me. Emily tilted her head. After all, marrying into money was probably his smartest investment. The laughter came quickly, louder than the night before, because now the narrative had already been seeded. Richard laughed openly. Diane smiled. Someone near the bar clapped lightly. I stood still, calm, because right then, my phone vibrated in my hand, and I already knew who it was before I looked. Michael Hargrove. The call I had been expecting. The call that would change everything. I stepped slightly away and answered quietly. "Daniel." His voice was calm, but urgent. "The CEO just arrived. He needs your authorization tonight." I glanced back toward the crowd. Emily was still smiling, basking in the laughter. "What happened?" I asked. "They finalized the acquisition. The holding group is now under Mercer Capital control." I let the silence sit for a moment. Behind me, someone repeated Emily's joke. More laughter. Michael continued. "We're scheduling the announcement tomorrow morning, but he wants to speak with you personally." I watched Emily raise her glass again. "Give me 10 minutes, I said. "Of course, Mr. Mercer." He hung up. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Then I walked back toward the group. Emily saw me first. "Daniel," she said lightly, still smiling. "We were just talking about you." I nodded. "I just got an important call." Richard chuckled. "Hope it wasn't work. Tonight's about family." I met his eyes. "It was," I said calmly. "And it does involve family." Emily's smile faltered just slightly. A flicker of confusion. The room grew quieter, because the tone had changed. And for the first time that night, Emily realized something was shifting. She just didn't know yet how much. Emily tilted her head slightly, still holding her champagne glass. "What kind of call?" she asked, her voice light but careful. A few guests nearby leaned in subtly. The laughter from a moment ago hadn't fully settled yet, and now there was a quiet curiosity hanging in the air. I kept my voice calm. "Just something that needed my authorization." Richard smiled, relaxed again. "Work can wait until Monday, Daniel." Normally, I would have agreed, but before I could answer, the front door opened. One of the catering staff stepped aside, and two men entered, both in dark suits, slightly out of place compared to the more relaxed atmosphere of the party. I recognized them immediately. Michael Hargrove walked in first. Behind him was Jonathan Pierce, the CEO of Hargrove Development Group. They paused near the entrance, scanning the room. Michael spotted me almost instantly. Then he started walking toward me. I saw Emily notice them too. She didn't recognize them, but she could tell something was different. The room subtly shifted as the two men moved forward with purpose. Richard frowned slightly, trying to place them. When they reached us, Michael extended his hand. "Daniel," he said respectfully. "Sorry to interrupt your evening." The word choice mattered. Several people nearby heard it. "Daniel," not Mr. Mercer. Not casually. Respectfully. I shook his hand. "Of course." Jonathan Pierce nodded. "We needed to confirm before tomorrow's release." Richard stepped forward slightly, polite but cautious. "I'm Richard Mercer," he said. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Michael turned toward him. "Of course, Mr. Mercer. We've worked with your group indirectly." Richard nodded, still uncertain. Jonathan looked back at me. "We finalized the acquisition about 30 minutes ago. Mercer Capital now holds controlling authority." The words landed quietly, but they landed. I saw Richard's expression tighten slightly. Emily glanced between us, confusion growing. "Daniel," Michael continued, "we just need your authorization on the final announcement. The board's ready." There was a pause. Not dramatic, just quiet, because now several people were listening. Emily spoke first. "Wait, Mercer Capital?" Her voice was careful. "Yes," Michael said politely. She looked at me. "You're working with them?" I held her gaze. "I am Mercer Capital." Silence. Complete silence. For a second, nobody moved. Richard blinked. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. Jonathan stepped in calmly. "Daniel Mercer is majority controlling partner." I watched the realization begin spreading. Slowly at first, then faster. Emily's smile disappeared. Diane's posture stiffened. The two developers Richard had introduced earlier exchanged glances. Richard spoke again. "You're saying Daniel controls Mercer Capital?" "Yes," Michael said. "And the acquisition," Richard began carefully. Jonathan nodded. "Includes development pipelines tied to Mercer Development Holdings." That was the moment it landed fully. Richard's company. Emily's family projects. The room felt smaller. Emily looked at me. Not embarrassed, not angry, just stunned. "You never told me," she said quietly. I kept my voice even. "You never asked directly." That wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Richard cleared his throat. "Well, that's impressive," he said, trying to recover. But the shift had already happened. The same guests who had laughed minutes earlier were now watching me differently. Respect, curiosity, recalculation. Michael handed me his phone. "Authorization, Daniel." I reviewed the document quickly, then approved it. Jonathan nodded. "We'll proceed with the announcement in the morning." "Good." They shook my hand again. "Congratulations," Jonathan added. Then they stepped away, leaving the room in a strange quiet. Emily set her glass down slowly. She looked at me again, searching my face like she was seeing me for the first time. "You own all of that?" she asked quietly. "Not all," I said calmly. "But enough." Richard tried to laugh lightly. "Well, I guess we underestimated you." No one else laughed, because the joke from earlier still hung in the air. Married her for money. Now the contrast was unavoidable. Emily looked down briefly, then back up. "I didn't know," she said. "I know." Another quiet moment passed. Then conversation slowly resumed around us, but differently now. People approached me, asked questions, introduced themselves again, this time more formally. The shift wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Emily stood beside me, quieter than I'd ever seen her at an event like this. And for the first time since I'd known her, she wasn't leading the room anymore. She was standing next to me, trying to understand how she'd gotten it so wrong. The party didn't end immediately, but it changed. Not dramatically, no one made a scene, but the energy shifted in ways that were impossible to ignore. Conversations recalibrated. Introductions became more formal. The same people who had laughed earlier now spoke more carefully, more deliberately. Respect doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it just replaces something else. Emily stayed close to me for the next half hour, quieter than I'd ever seen her in a room like that. She smiled when people approached, nodded when they congratulated me. But the confidence she'd carried earlier was gone. Eventually, she leaned closer. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I nodded. We stepped out onto the back terrace, overlooking the lake. The music and conversation faded slightly behind us. The water was still, reflecting the lights from the house. Emily wrapped her arms loosely around herself. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. Her voice wasn't accusatory. It was uncertain. "I never hid anything," I said calmly. "I just didn't make it a centerpiece." She looked down. "I feel embarrassed." I didn't respond right away, because embarrassment wasn't really the issue. After a moment, she spoke again. "I was joking earlier. You know that." I met her eyes. You said it more than once. She swallowed slightly. I didn't mean it like that. I know. That part was true. Emily hadn't meant to humiliate me personally. But intention doesn't erase impact. She leaned against the railing. My parents, they're going to feel strange about this. That's understandable. She gave a small, uncertain laugh. You probably just changed half their upcoming projects. Not intentionally. But still. She looked at me again, searching for something. Reassurance, maybe. You're not upset with me, are you? I thought about that carefully. I'm not upset, I said finally. But I think tonight showed us something. What? That perception matters. She nodded slowly. We stood there quietly for another minute before returning inside. The rest of the evening passed without any more dramatic moments. Guests slowly filtered out. Conversation softened. Goodbyes stretched longer than usual. When we finally drove home, Emily was quiet the entire way. Not tense, just thoughtful. Over the next few weeks, the shift continued. The public announcement went out the following morning. Industry outlets covered the acquisition. My name appeared in a few business publications. Nothing flashy, just confirmation of control and future development plans. Emily's parents called 2 days later. Richard's tone was polite, but different. More measured, more careful. We met for dinner the following weekend. The conversation was friendly, but the dynamic had clearly changed. The quiet assumption that I was the lesser financial presence in the room was gone. Emily noticed it too. But the bigger change wasn't external. It was between us. Emily became more careful about how she spoke about me. The jokes disappeared. The framing changed. She introduced me simply as Daniel. No qualifiers, no positioning. But something else lingered. A distance. Not hostility. Just awareness. Because once you see how someone views you, or once you realize how you viewed someone, it's hard to return completely to the version that existed before. About 6 months later, Emily and I had a long conversation at home. Not dramatic, just honest. She admitted that she'd been influenced by her family's expectations, that she'd started measuring success differently, that she'd allowed herself to believe a narrative about our relationship that wasn't fair. I admitted my own role too. I'd chosen privacy over transparency, calm over communication, observation over conversation. Neither of us had handled it perfectly. We didn't separate, but we did reset. Over the next year, we built something quieter, less performative, less influenced by outside expectations. Emily stepped back slightly from her family's social orbit. We spent more weekends away from the usual circles. The townhouse we'd lived in, the one she once described as small, became a place we both appreciated again. 18 months later, we moved. Not into something extravagant, just a larger home outside town. Quiet, private, comfortable, something that felt like us. And the truth is, the money was never the important part. It never had been. What mattered was respect. And that night at the lake house taught me something I still carry with me. People often assume they understand your value based on what you show them. Your house, your car, your lifestyle, your willingness to speak. But real stability, real control, rarely looks loud. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it looks simple. And sometimes it looks like the person standing silently while everyone else laughs. Until the phone rings. If you've ever been underestimated, or quietly judged, or made to feel smaller than you are, I'd be curious to know what happened when people finally realized they were wrong. And if stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts below. Because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that stay with you the longest.